Okay, welcome to this meeting in our on research ethics in our forum. My name is Johan and I'm leading this forum at the University of Oslo. And it's a pleasure to welcome to today's main speakers, Professor David Sanders from Indiana and Nick Weiss from Cambridge, who joins us online. They will soon be properly introduced by our Norwegian expert in this field, Dr. Morten Oksvold, who also have been inviting the guests and have been very active in organizing this meeting. So actually, we planned this meeting already in June, but had to postpone it for various reasons. But I showed the slides to recommend this very interesting interview with Morten in the University newspaper Chrono in March this year, where he talks about how the network that he's part of has revealed hundreds of problematic research papers. And this old slide also illustrates a case, one of the two cases in Norway recently, where two ministers of health and research were accused of plagiarism in their master's degrees thesis and had to leave their government positions. And this is also increased interest in today's topic. So this is our agenda for today. The language will naturally be English, and since Nick Weiss wasn't able to travel to Oslo, he'll give his talk via Zoom. But David Sanders is here and will talk here, of course. And there will be streaming and recording of the talks, which will later be posted on our homepage. You see the link at the bottom there in yellow. After the talks, there will be time for questions from the audience and discussions. And I've been reminded that we should send around this protocol to people to sign up for. Yeah. So it's required by our organization. But before Morten introduces the speakers, I'll say a few words about our forum. For those of you who may not know it, this has been part of the Forskerforbundet here at the university since 2006. And we organize open meetings and discussions on current issues and problems that are important for researchers and other academics. And you see some of the academic freedom and speech, research funding, open access publishing, university democracy and so forth. And you see the members of our current board to the right, with Einar Uggerud, Nina Witoszek, Eivind Østerud, and myself. In this meeting, we'll focus on research ethics and integrity versus scientific misconduct in various forms and degrees. And this collage of pictures illustrates some of the variety of cases. But I want to stress that there are, of course, enormous differences between the most serious cases and the less serious cases, where there may not even be proper research involved, maybe just thesis by students and so on. This theme is, of course, quite depressing and therefore often avoided, but it has become increasingly important for both universities and society at large, threatening to undermine the public trust in science as well as science itself. So therefore, it's a proper theme for our forum. I'm no expert in this field, but I followed it in the news, and I clearly remember this highly influential article in The Economist in 2013, How Science Goes Wrong. And I strongly recommend that. You see the link at the bottom. Since then, the problems have only continued to grow. Last year, there was a record number of retracted research papers, more than 10,000 worldwide. And most of them were retracted because of misconduct. Another good reason to talk about these problems is that they are strongly connected in various ways to many other important issues in academia that we care about and discuss in our forum, such as research quality, academic culture, academic freedom and leadership, freedom of speech, whistleblowing, science ombudsman, university reputation, research funding, and publication pressure. And of course, the predatory publishing has been increasing sharply in predatory journals and conferences. In fact, it seems that nearly all these issues are more or less interconnected in various complex ways, which makes it very hard to fully understand and solve any one of them in isolation. That's also a reason to discuss this. As I mentioned, we have had some very serious cases of misconduct here in Scandinavia. The Sudbø case in Oslo from 2006, when a young, very productive cancer researcher was caught fabricating a lot of his data. The Pentkova case in Copenhagen, 2010, also involving a lot of data fabrication. And even more serious, the Macchiarini case in Stockholm at the Karolinska Institute, where an Italian surgeon, considered a star in his field, performed experimental surgeries, trachea implants in patients, and 7 or 8 of them died from complications, and more than 10 of his research papers were retracted because of fraud. And some of these cases have also illustrated that university leaders sometimes contributed to the problems by first supporting these researchers, like Pentkova and Macchiarini, perhaps to protect their university reputation. Again, I'm no expert on this, but I know that the rector at Karolinska was forced to resign, and also the rector in Copenhagen was strongly criticized. As I said, there are many different forms and degrees of misconduct, and from serious fraud, as I talked about, the Macchiarini and data fabrication, cherry picking, which is perhaps quite common, misleading statistics, authorship fraud, plagiarism of various degrees and kinds. But again, there are very large differences, of course, in how severe and serious these cases are. That was all from my side, and now I would like to ask Morten to please come forward and introduce the two main speakers, Nick Weiss and David Sanders. Thank you.
Hello, do you hear me? Welcome.
Vil du starte, Anine?
I'm pleased to introduce our distinguished speakers for today's event. Dr. Nick Weiss, an expert in architectural fluid dynamics from the Department of Engineering at the University of Cambridge, UK. And Associated Professor David Sanders from the Department of Biological Sciences at Purdue University, USA. Nick Weiss will give a 30 minutes online presentation, followed by David Sanders. And you're welcome to ask questions after each talk. As Johan mentioned, we do have a large problem with mass publication of scientific misinformation today, where a large proportion of the published papers can be dubious. Surprisingly, no governmental or international organizations have shown any responsibility for addressing these problems. Despite the fact that scientific misinformation has led to deaths, financial losses, health policy challenges, and serious errors in political decision-making processes. In sports, they have an independent, powerful international organization that fights against cheating. You might expect influential organizations that prioritize science and societal well-being to take meaningful action. But such efforts remain elusive, unfortunately. The fight against the growing wave of scientific misinformation is done by dedicated sleuths or detectives like Nick Weiss, David Sanders, and myself, who are part of a committed network working tirelessly by reporting problematic issues, not only in biological sciences, but also generally in academia. Nick Weiss has gained recognition for his advanced techniques in uncovering fraud in scientific publications, while David Sanders is known as an unwavering force, relentlessly pursuing justice in cases of a discovered misconduct. A notable example is the high-profile Karl case at Ohio State University, where David's involvement even led to legal action. Today, Nick Weiss and David Sanders are here to share their invaluable insights and experiences. With that, I turn into Nick Weiss. Nick? Do you hear me? The screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you for having me today. Let me just share my screen as to say. Okay, can you see this? My Morten?
Yes, just a second here. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, so we can see the screen here. Perfect. Perfect.
Okay, then if I'm all set up, then yeah, I shall begin. Okay, so yeah, after that introduction, I will be talking on the scientific paper as product, so paper mills and authorship for sale. So focusing on a couple of specific aspects of research fraud or even publication fraud as Morten described just now. So the outline of this talk, I'm going to let's cover some recent mass retractions and think about why they might have happened. Think about the scientific paper as a product. Discuss paper mills and what is a paper mill. We'll have some examples of their output of recent investigations and look into how they might operate. We'll think about what we can do to tackle paper mills and authorship for sale, and then a summary at the end. So, as was just noted, last year there were over 10,000 retractions of scientific papers for the first time ever, and in the last couple of years there have been multiple mass retractions. Hindawi is the most, the largest and made, I think, the most impact because it was I think in the end over 11,000 articles they have retracted so far. But there were other still what previously would have been very significant retraction events. So the Institute of Physics Publishing in the UK retracted 350 papers at once. Elsevier have retracted over 500 papers at once for shoddy peer review. And I guess this is distinct probably from many of when someone says research fraud, what people tend to think of is someone is making up their data or perhaps plagiarism. But it is one person who is behind the wrongdoing, and it's their papers with their name on that they are improving their data. They are making it up to claim they've figured out a problem that they haven't figured out. They're doing it for their own. They are doing it for their personal gain, but they're pretty much doing it on their own, right? They might do it for quite a long time. They might make a career out of it, perhaps, if no one catches them. But they are pretty much acting on their own. Whereas with all of these mass retractions, that is not what's been happening. Instead, there is a systematic manipulation of the publication process by some outside organization or group of people, and often, amongst these, say, 350 papers, amongst these 8,000 papers, there probably aren't many common authors. There probably, some people might have written 5 papers out of those 8,000. Some people might have written a few, again, of the 350. But the commonality here is not one bad author or one bad group or something. It's most of the authors will not know each other at all. And what the common link is that they've all used a paper mill, or they've all used some external organization to get their paper published. So let's think about, the scientific paper as a product. So as probably everyone in the audience is aware, sort of papers and citations are the currency of academia. If you have more papers and those papers are cited more, then you are more likely to get a job, to get a promotion, to get grant funding, to get everything really. There's no real way, as things stand, that sort of having a few more papers would harm you, right? It will look good on your CV. But because of this, it makes them financially viable. Financially valuable. So what is a paper mill? So United to Act, which is a sort of an organization of with representatives from publishers and institutions and I think funders and sleuths. I'm involved with this. But a group sort of trying to come up with some guidance of how we might start to fix things, but defines a paper mill as organizations or individuals that aim to profit from the creation, sale, peer review, and/or citation of manuscripts at scale, which contain low value or fraudulent content and/or authorship, with the aim of publication in scholarly journals. Right. So very broad in terms of what that could be. And it really is, there is not one kind of paper mill. It could be as much as one person who decides that they want to start selling authorships of papers, and they create a WhatsApp group, and they send it round their friends or colleagues or people they know who might be interested, and it grows organically from there, and it pretty much stays as that one WhatsApp group. Or it could be a business. It could be a business with an office, with a name above the door, with full-time employees, rows of desks and computers, who are really doing this at scale as a profit-making enterprise, right? And everything in between. So paper mills are easy to find once you think to look for them. Okay, so this is a screenshot of just my Telegram yesterday. So those are all channels, Telegram channels. So Telegram is a messaging app. There are, anyone can set up a group, and you can join those channels and talk about whatever you wish. And it is used by many paper mills from particular countries. So there are, as far as I know, no Chinese paper mills on Telegram, because I think China blocks access to Telegram. But I think just in that screenshot, there are paper mills from India, Iran, Iraq, and Uzbekistan, I think, just looking at those. And many of them are posting every day, often multiple times. And we can see even just from the sort of the beginning of some of those messages, call for papers in an international peer-reviewed journal. A citation booster. So it's not just papers that are valuable, or sort of being an author on a paper that is valuable, but it's even you can also sell the sort of references section of a paper, and then someone will pay for that, and then their paper will be cited, and their citation count will grow, their H-index will grow, and that can be a more subtle way of I guess committing publication fraud or boosting your career. All of your papers are genuine and they are yours. You're not buying any authorships, you're not buying any papers, but you just pay for some people to cite your papers. And as with as we'll see, you can do this and sort of, and the same with state of authorship, you can do this in a clever way or you can do this in a stupid way, right? So with the citations, again, if someone does start to pay attention, does read the references section carefully or something, if you just pay to be for, if I paid for my fluid dynamics papers to be cited in a cancer journal, that's going to stand out. That's going to look a bit stupid if anyone decides, why did they cite that paper? That's not relevant. But if I pay to cite my papers in a fluid dynamics journal, that's going to be much harder for anyone to spot. That might take an expert in the domain to go to see that although both the papers are on fluid dynamics, it's not really relevant to the claim that's being made in the paper. And so some of these, so that citation booster channel, for example, each of their posts shares the keywords to the paper that is being sort of offered, the references section are being offered. So you can sign up and know that your work is going to match the topic of that paper, and so it will stand out less and you're less likely to be caught. Right? So these are all sort of different things that you can do, and some people are careful and some people are careless, as we'll see. So that's Telegram. And likewise, if you go on Facebook and just type in Scopus into the search bar, you can find dozens of Facebook groups, all dedicated to publishing in Scopus journals with 10 or more posts a day, thousands of members. Now, many of these posts are scams, right? And this is something we'll come back to, is sort of who is scamming who here. But nonetheless, there are many of these groups with thousands of members. And likewise, if you type in co-author, again, you find another set of Facebook groups where some more popular than others, but there'll be someone saying, I have this paper, this is the topic, or maybe this is the title, if they're again being a bit careless. Someone can be third author, someone can be second author if they'll pay the article processing charge. Maybe they could even be first and corresponding author if they pay the article processing charge. And people meet organically like that. And that's I suppose that certainly cool for co-author sort of thing, where someone's saying themselves, I have a paper, will you help me, is not really a paper mill. That's a very organic sort of people doing it themselves. But there are paper mills and authorship brokers who will be a middleman for you. You can go to them and say, I've got this paper, I want to add more authors to it to make money, or to pay the author, specifically to pay the article processing charge. And there'll be other people going to them saying, I want to be an author on a paper on this topic, and they put the two of you together. So just here are two examples from posted yesterday. So this is from an Uzbek paper mill Telegram channel. So Makola is the Uzbek word for article. And so this is a pretty typical, or I suppose actually at the extreme end of how much information they're choosing to share, but we can see sort of the dynamics here. So, co-authors participation, they are first, up top, the price, right? And here they think what they're trying to tell us here is that this is a discount. Previously it was $1,100 to be second author on this article. Now it's only $600. This is a good deal. And from when they previously advertised it, by the looks of it, there was a slightly different title, but now they've changed the title. And they give us, the beginning of the abstract, we're giving the keywords, we're giving the journal name, and again, it says new journal name. So what this suggests is that they originally targeted a different journal, and so it had a slightly different, and with a different title. They submitted it to the journal, it was probably rejected, and now they want to resubmit it. And they probably do know that journals now have, some journals do have these detection systems for, if the same article is sent to multiple journals, if the same title is sent to multiple places, we'll just flag it and reject it. So they've changed the title, they've changed the journal. But that's, we can say Science Direct, so that's Elsevier, they're sending this to an Elsevier journal. And on the right, we have a Taylor and Francis journal that's being targeted, much lower prices for whatever reason. We're told that there will be 5 authors, but the first 2 are booked. Sorry, the last 2 are booked. But for $300, you can be first author on this paper heading for petroleum science and technology. Okay. So these are very typical of a certain kind of advert for authorship. So now look at a couple of examples of paper mills which I've investigated this year. So the first one is called HiQ or AQ Papers. They changed their name partway through operation. And it was in the form of a Telegram channel. And they also had a WhatsApp group, which was set up by a man called Dr. Ali Kudair, who is an Iraqi professor. And yeah, the investigation is on for Better Science if anyone would like to read more details on it. And so this is a typical typical adverts that they were posting on the Telegram channel for this paper mill. So again, for ease of tracking the papers, they gave them ID numbers, which is also very helpful for me because it means if the title changes, they maintained the ID. So that's very useful. They tell us the title of the paper, the journal. Again, both of these are going for Elsevier. We can see the prices, again, in the high hundreds of dollars. And they also tell us the status of the paper. So this is a paper that has been submitted and then come back saying, please make these revisions, but it's, accepted subject to revision or, minor revision, major revision. It hasn't been rejected. And it's at that point that they place the advert. So paper mills want to run efficiently and they want to be able to promise or sort of give their customers the best experience, and they're more likely to be used over other paper mills if they're giving a better experience, right? There is a market economy of this. And there's obviously, whenever you submit a paper, there's a chance you'll just be rejected, right? Either by the editor or the revisions come back and the reviews come back and the reviews about, recommend rejection. And so you get no chance to fix anything. That if you sell the authorships of the paper before submission, that's potentially going to give a much longer time between someone sort of joining on, maybe paying their money, and finally getting this paper published. So it's in the paper mills, it's better business for the paper mill and a better experience for their customers if they submit the paper, wait till it's sort of accepted subject to revision, and then they place the advert, and then that's sort of where the time begins for their customers between when they sort of sign on and when the paper is published. And both of these papers were published, okay? And both have now been retracted or withdrawn. The wonderful quirk of modern publishing, where some paper appearing online does not mean it is published, even though everyone can read it. It is only when the paper, possibly several months later, is assigned a volume number or an issue number that the paper is officially published, even for journals which no longer have any print articles at all. And so because all the problems with this paper were found and Elsevier investigated before the paper was assigned an issue number, instead of being retracted, it is simply withdrawn. And so that's that distinction. But it also means you can't read it anymore. Whereas the one on the right, you can go and read, and it will just have retracted across it in big red letters. Because if it were the one on the left, you can't read, you can't see it. The one on the left, we can also see, in particular, there is a large typo in the title of consumption. But nonetheless, that made it past the reviewers, past the editors, past the typesetters, and was published. And again, on both of these, we can see a lot of matching names between left and right papers. And we saw that the WhatsApp group was run by a Dr. Ali Couder, and the second author on the right paper, and somewhere down the author list on the left-hand paper is Dr. Ali Couder Al-Jaburi. So the guy running the paper mill is himself putting himself as an author on these papers as well. So these papers had, beyond just the fact that they had sold authorship, how the paper mill constructed these papers was not by someone doing some original work and then selling authorship. It was by plagiarizing pretty outrageously articles from 1, 2, 3, 4 years earlier, taking diagrams, just wholesale copy paste, changing the text enough that it didn't get flagged by Turnitin, Authenticate, whatever the journal used, but nonetheless very clearly, and stealing data very clearly, but nonetheless didn't flag any of the systems and got published. And we can see the retraction notice here for the paper on the right. So this article has been retracted at the request of the editors-in-chief, following identification of apparently unrelated citations. So that was the thing that was actually originally picked up by someone and flagged to Elsevier. An investigation of this paper identified 8 authors added following initial review. And this is a form of authorship manipulation. Yeah, it is. The 8 added authors were, and there they all are, and the number of unrelated citations, which again, so they're throwing in some extra citations to the paper or references to the paper. In this case, it wasn't actually to boost a person, it was to boost a journal. So another little trick or a reason to manipulate things is not just for authors who want more citations, but if you run a small journal, if you're starting a journal, you want to get it in Scopus, you want to get it in Web of Science, and they won't include you until, I guess, your journal is being recognized by other scientists or by other people. One of the obvious ways they can sort of recognize it is by citing works in your journal. That shows that you're publishing good work, and therefore people want to refer to it and build on it. So this paper mill, in every single paper that they published, added in a few citations to one journal in particular, which is of which Ali Couder is an editor. So there are multiple angles, multiple dimensions to any of these things. And a nice thing here, the corresponding author maintains that the authorship and citation are correct. So even when caught fairly red-handed, no, this is all still fine. So before sort of being caught and stopped, and the paper mill began posting around the beginning of this year, they actually were not too prolific. So they only posted adverts for 24 distinct papers. 13 of those were successfully published, 12 in Elsevier and 1 in MDPI. And in each case, the authors were added at the revision stage, so 3 of them have been retracted so far, and in that case it's pretty clear. The notice says explicitly these were added at the revision stage. For the others which are not yet retracted, the advert said that the paper was revised, and so I know that it must have been added at the revision stage, which really is pretty extraordinary. That, as it said in the retraction notice just there, this shouldn't be possible, right? This shouldn't be allowed. This is against the journal policy. You're supposed to ask the editor's permission if you want to make any authorship changes at all at revision stage. But it turns out, at least in Elsevier's system, that if you don't ask permission, you can just do it anyway, right? So this is a pretty big flaw in Elsevier's entire editorial process, where you can just add 8 authors to a paper in revision and no one stops you. Okay, example number 2 is looking at Hindawi and all of their special issues, and a Chinese paper mill called Olive Academic. So I'm going to focus on one particular special issue, which is published in Wireless Communications and Mobile Computing. which I wrote about on Dorothy Bishop's blog. Someone wants to read more. So this was one of the first ones I sort of noticed something very odd sort of going on. So there's 62 papers in this published in this special issue. And given the title of the special issue, AI-driven wireless energy harvesting, only 2 of the titles contain wireless and none mention energy at all in the title. Titles include analysis model of the guiding role of national sportsmanship on the consumer market of table tennis and related IoT applications, and evaluation method of the metacognitive ability of Chinese reading teaching for junior middle school students based on Dijkstra algorithm and IoT applications. Right. So these papers are utterly irrelevant to the topic of the special issue. And what has happened is that they have, I believe, at least, is that I think in every single case, pretty much, a Chinese author who needs a paper, probably needs a paper to graduate. They've been told they must have one paper to get their master's, 3 papers to get their PhD. They go to this company, Olive Academic. They say, "I need these papers. I need a publication, and here's my master's thesis. Here's some work I have done. I'm studying consumer market of table tennis. I'm studying teaching reading to junior middle school students." And then the paper mill sort of mushes that together, adds on IoT applications to the title, and sort of throws that into one of their special issues. So this special issue had 3 guest editors, and Hindawi did tell you who the editor was. So you can see that 60 papers had one of the editors, doing the job. 2 had the other one, and none of the papers had the 3rd guest editor, which is, again, not exactly sharing the load. I'm looking at slightly odd. What was weirder is that if you looked at the corresponding email addresses for each of these papers, only 4 had a corresponding email address where the email address matched the institution of the corresponding author. And 58 of the others used a Manshan University address, which is a regional university in China. And none of the authors were at that university. Hardly anyone has published papers from that university. And all of them were the form 1940, 4 random digits at mathsu.edu.cn. So here, for example, here are some papers from that, and you can see the sort of 8 characters preceding the which were the corresponding email address for each of these papers. It looks pretty clear that someone has bought a block of email addresses from this university and is using them just one by one to submit papers. As an aside on email addresses, you can just buy email addresses. You can buy institutional email addresses. So just that being sort of a yes/no flag for, is this paper okay or not? Oh, they have an institutional email address. Well, that can't be a problem. It absolutely can be. And one of my favorite ones is that somehow this school, African King's School, which is a school in Burundi, is on this Chinese website selling email addresses, and it was used as the corresponding author, and the corresponding author is apparently Clermont-Ferrand, but Clermont-Ferrand is a large town in France and is not a real person, and that has been invented as the corresponding author to go probably so that this Chinese author can say that they are doing an international collaboration, which is another thing which you sort of get points for, or can get points for. So another way that these special issues can sort of be used and abused, there are 62 papers in the special issue. Across all of them, there are 139 references to one guy called Malik Bada Al-Azam, who we will get back to. So yeah, the references section for every paper is a product that can be sold. So again, on Facebook, some of the Chinese agents who work for these paper mills will advertise to try and attract business and attract the people they need to collaborate with. So this guy who sort of goes by the name Jack Ben, you see, but his name is sort of, he's trying to do SEO optimization with the SCI EI. There's a sort of labels for good journals. So he's trying to find reviewers. And again, he knows that if you just suggest reviewers who are anyone, that most journals will now reject those. They say, well, that's not a real person. So he knows that the reviewers have to have institutional emails and they should have published some papers, right? And so they'll have a Google Scholar profile. They'll be real. The journal will recognize them as real people and will go, oh yeah, of course, you can review this paper. In fact, you even need to send him your CV, right? So they're not completely stupid sometimes. Likewise, if he's saying, if you have a paper, if you need authors, we can collaborate. He currently has more than 35 papers that he's sort of sitting on that he needs to get going. He has more than 200 customers who need to publish papers. If you've got a finished paper that you can add authors to, get in touch with him. You'll make money together. And particularly, does anyone want to be a guest editor for an SCI journal? Right? And again, he knows you have to be a real person. You have to have an institutional email. You have to have published papers online. But if you do, again, he wants to collaborate with you. And so this is the company he works for. Again, they say exactly what they do. They have more than 120 sort of journals I have access to. So what they're saying is that they have 120 journals where there is at least one corrupt editor that they can use to publish papers. And by this point, it's over 150 journals they say they're collaborating with. And there is a long table here with many familiar names if you read Retraction Watch and see which journals have mass retractions. And so here's one example. So again, another post from this guy, Jack Ben. He says, we want 100 papers to be submitted to this special issue. He gives the special issue. And again, here are the editors of that special issue. It was real. It did have a lot of papers published in it before they were retracted, or mostly retracted. And someone who stands out there slightly is Marvin White. So Marvin White's email is bizarrely marvinwebb@scos.edu, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't exist either. I think he's another invented person by the paper mill. He has 3 retracted papers in Hindawi special issues now. One of them edited by Malik Al-Azam, the man with many references we saw earlier. And in the course of preparing this presentation, I discovered that he has this year had another paper published in PLOS One, this man who I'm pretty sure does not exist. So that's something which I need to email after this talk. And Jack Ben's sort of final thing is really showing why you should collaborate with him as an editor, is that he shared screenshots of all these bank transfers, which are showing that the going rate for accepting a paper in this Hindawi special issue is about $1,000 per paper. Now, many of these Hindawi special issues had over 200 papers in them. So this is incredibly profitable. And again, very admin organized person. He's used the article reference number used by Hindawi as the reference for the bank transfer, which means I was able to look them up and show that they were indeed real papers, they were published, and that Malik Al-Azam was the editor of those. In fact, so here is another screenshot of the bank transfer sending someone $16,300. And if you look at the bottom there, so Malik Al-Azam is based in Jordan, and there is an M-ZAM in Jordan that this $16,000 is being sent to. Now, as is somewhat inevitable, if you arrange that people keep citing you in special issues, you end up as a top 2% researcher for the world. Right? So for the year 2022 and in 2021, he was a top cited researcher. He was on that 2% list. So now looking at authorship. So also they say that author responsibilities, so people who've made a significant contribution to some aspect of the paper, right? If you've made a significant contribution, you can be a co-author. But what stops authorship being sold? Nothing. Okay. So again, here's a selection of adverts These are all from Facebook now rather than Telegram. Again, we're seeing hundreds, if not $1,000, for authorship. Sometimes we're including the title, sometimes just keywords. But of course, is it a scam? You know, if you give them some money, do they just take your money? You don't get a paper, right? Are you being scammed? And no, right? If you just compare that, conductive gels, properties and applications, nanoelectronic, 10 authors. Conductive gels, properties and applications of nanoelectronics, 10 authors. I mean, it has now been retracted, but it's not a scam at all. These sort of and real international collaborations. No one is at the same institution. Most people are not in the same country. And here, another example, same person selling the authorship. Another retraction. And we can see that the 7th person is based at the Tashkent State University of Economics in Uzbekistan. And apparently, they performed the scanning electron microscopy and the X-ray diffraction analysis. Now, I don't know how many economics departments would have those capabilities. So the author contributions, which is supposed to sort of say who did what, and what would someone do if they hadn't given any contribution to the paper? Well, you just lie, right? Again, there's nothing to say that people can't lie in the author contributions. So this doesn't introduce any sort of check at all. And it's pretty much funny to say, this is big business. I mean, if being paid $1,000 per paper for a special issue with 250 papers in it, obviously that's going to make a lot. But we can see this is an advert that was placed on a jobs website that I found, based in China, but you're earning you're working remotely, so $10,000 to $30,000 a month writing SCI papers, and they're openly advertising it. So what can we do? I mean, we need to remove the incentives. Right? People are only doing this because more papers is better, more citations is better. If academic jobs and promotion was less tied to how many papers do you have and how many times are they cited, as opposed to what is in those papers and is the work good, then that would remove a lot of, much of the incentive. We should all be vigilant for abuse of the publication system. So, are the authors real? Feels like it should be a basic question, but keeps happening. Is a guest editor real? Is this email address plausible? Or is it real? Does it match the institution they're from? Improve editorial processes. It should not be possible to add 8 authors at the revision stage without the editor noticing, right? I mean, and if that should not be possible. Now, obviously, if the editor is corrupt, if the editor's been bribed, then that can still happen. But it should still be a bit of a flag somewhere that the number of authors has changed so significantly between submission and publication. And you can help, right? Report if you find a problem with a paper or you suspect something. We report them on PubPeer or share it with the journal, share it with the institution. Because right now there's not enough people doing it, and it's new things are being created faster than anyone can deal with, let alone dealing with all the things in the past. It requires everyone. So in summary, publishing fraud is prolific and it's very profitable. Fake papers are produced on an industrial scale. We need systematic change to remove the incentives, and a massive cleanup of the literature. Thank you very much.
So will you take questions now, or should we go directly to Sanders?
Happy to take questions later, yes.
Okay, later, okay. Yeah. Okay, so then David Sanders, we are looking very much forward to your talk, and here's the microphone, so great.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Great, thanks. All right. So first I want to thank Morten for inviting me to speak with you today. And I want to thank all of you for being here. I've really had I've had a couple days here in Oslo, and I've been very pleased with being here, despite the fact that it's mostly been gray. But I would just want to mention a little experience that I had. I went to one of the cemeteries here in Oslo, and there was a gravestone for a college professor there, and it read, "Publisert, men likevel omkommet." Okay, that works in English. Maybe it doesn't work so well in Norwegian. So the idea is publish or perish, published but still perished. Okay. Right. So there were a lot of people now working in this field of trying to detect problems in the scientific literature, and I've been working in it for a while, but I'm less focused on the individual paper or the authors that are involved, and more interested in the institutional responses to violations of scientific integrity. That is, the responses by journals and the responses by institutions, research institutions, universities, and so on. I'll have less to say about the responses of funding agencies because, in general, there's zero response, so there's not much to talk about. It's mostly, you don't hear from them, they don't do much. So what I just want to do is to start by introducing you to where my most recent incarnation as a scientific detective, as a scientific sleuth started. This is Mono Lake in California. It's just east of the of Yosemite National Park. Beautiful place. And it was at this site that a bacterium was isolated. It was published in 2010. It was supposed to be a remarkable bacterium that the authors claimed could use arsenic, specifically arsenate, to replace phosphate, in nucleic acids. Okay? So DNA has a phosphate backbone, phosphodiester backbone, and they claimed that they could substitute arsenate for phosphate. This was a 2010 Science article. I happened to be driving into work. I have a relatively short drive to work, and I frequently walk, but it was the winter in Indiana. It's pretty cold there. So I drove this day, listening to the radio, and they described this work. I said, that's not possible. I worked on phosphoryl transfer when I was a graduate student. I worked on something called two-component regulatory systems. It's the way bacteria respond to their environments. I had studied phosphoryl transfer at a great depth, and I knew that the chemistry just said this is impossible. The arsenal esters would hydrolyze within seconds. There's no way this is possible. So I look at the article, and importantly, what I did was to look at the supplementary material. Bam, it's right there in their table. The authors know that their arsenate is contaminated with phosphate. End of story. The bacteria are resistant to arsenate. They're not poisoned by arsenate. They come from an arsenate-rich environment. That's why they tried to isolate the bacterium. But it's phosphate. There's small amounts of phosphate, and all the data in the paper say that. So I started writing about this and talking about this. A paper has never been retracted. It was immediately panned by the scientific community. Everybody said this is garbage. But when it first came out, it was featured on the front page of newspapers all over the world. And I was able to obtain the peer reviews. The peer reviews were absolutely dreadful. The journal didn't handle this. The institutions didn't handle this well. Nobody handled this well. So I thought this was an interesting window into how the scientific process goes wrong. So I started giving talks about it, and I spoke, all around the world about this. What was most interesting about the experience is, first, I work on viruses and how they get into cells, and you typically give a 50-minute talk with 10 minutes of questions, right? This talk, I would have 30 minutes, 45 minutes of questions afterward. Everybody wanted to discuss these issues, because I not only talk about the problems, I also talk about solutions, which I'll get to later on. But the most interesting part is people would come up to me afterwards and say, "You think that's bad? You should take a look at this." So I did. So I started looking into the things that people provide me. And I will say, people to this day contact me and say, "Could you please take a look at this?" So on and so forth. And one of the things that they asked me to look at was the following. So this is published, and I'm not going to be talking about the authors at all. I'm not going to be mentioning the authors. I am going to be talking about the journals, because I think they hold the responsibility here. And so this was published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, a fairly prominent publication in the United States. This is something called an immunoblot, or a Western blot. In essence, I'm not familiar with everybody in the audience, but I'll just explain. I have a mixture of proteins. I added detergent to take away the shape of the protein. That also puts a charge on the protein, a negative charge on the protein. I put it in an electric field, and it'll migrate towards the positive pole. It's got negative charge on it. And it'll go through a matrix, and the small things find their way through the matrix faster than large things. So I get out of this experiment how large is the protein. And then what I do is I transfer it to a piece of paper, and then I put in antibodies that recognize my particular proteins, and that'll light up. So I get two pieces of information out of this experiment. How big is the protein, and how much of the protein is there. Okay? Here is the image from the paper. And you can see different types of bands. I want you to take a look at this. I'm a college professor, so I ask people to answer questions. Do you see anything here that's wrong? Is there anything that's peculiar about these particular images? I'll focus your attention on the bottom panel that's labeled beta-actin. Do you see anything unusual about that? Well, it's slanted, yes, but that's not the most important part. It's copied, that's right. So, it turns out bands look like bands, and I'm going to use a technical term here. Again, frequently talk to American audiences. To use a technical term here, it's not just what the band looks like, it's the schmutz, which is tells you that there's a copying going on. So if you take a look at 3, 4, and 5, you will see that they've been copied in 6, 7, and 8. Does everyone see that? I don't know. Is there any way to turn down the lights up front at least? But if you see, here's 3, 4, and 5. You can see. Oh, let's take a look at 5. You see that little dot there? I could try that. Let's see. You see this little dot here? It's reproduced by this little dot here. There's this fuzzy here. Those are the same. That cannot happen in the experiment. There's no chance that could happen at random. Also, this cannot be merely a mistake. It cannot be that this looks like it's one experiment, and it's reporting as one experiment. There's no way that you can make the mistake and copy it within a particular image. Sometimes, as we'll see, you can have an image here, an image there. You may have made a mistake. You got your files mixed up. This can only be misconduct. So I contacted the journal and said, take a look at this. Looks like there's a problem. They contacted the authors. The author says, no problem. They're not the same. And they used some sort of mathematical program to show that they were not the same. I looked at the data. The data say that the two things are the same. Okay? They send it out, I insist, they send it out to two experts. One of them says, yes, of course it's copied. The other one says, I'm not so sure. So the journal doesn't do anything. Okay. We'll come back to it in a second. These are two paintings in the Wallace collection in London. And they each portray Perseus and Andromeda. One is by Titian. This one here by Titian. And this is by François Lemoine. This one comes first. Now, there is no question that they have a common origin, right? This is not merely a copy of this, but it's got all the exact same elements, right? The undressed woman, who's being rescued by the guy flying in the air. There's a city in the background. There's the monster that's doing. They're based on the same myth, but they're also based on the same iconography. All right? So I'm not saying anything wrong with what François Lemoine did, right? This is the nature of art. But one would not argue that these two paintings had a separate iconographic origin. They clearly had a common origin. And that's what's important about this, which is not, can I find some trivial difference between two images and therefore conclude that they have a different source? The question is, how likely is it that these two images would be so similar and have absolutely distinct origins? One of the things that happens as images get copied, there are errors introduced. There are things called compression errors that occur as you copy images over and over again. So when you look at the pixels, they will look different. It doesn't mean it wasn't copied. Okay, and we'll get back to François Lemoine in a second. The laboratory from which the previous image was taken, I started looking into it. This is how I operate. I'm not just interested in, one mistake, right? I want to see whether there's a pattern here. And I found more than 30 articles from this laboratory that either had plagiarism or image manipulation, image duplication, or both. More than 30 articles. I would write to the journals. And I mostly didn't get any satisfactory results. I'll tell you something about that in a moment. So I decided to go to the New York Times, which is probably the most prominent newspaper in the United States, and tell them about this. And so they started investigating. And I'll tell you more about that in a moment, because the journals were not taking any proper action. Okay, this is a similar experiment, similar type of image, except instead of proteins being separated, it is RNA molecules being separated. And RNA molecules have an inherent negative charge. You don't have to add the detergent to give them the negative charge. They just have a negative charge. Same sort of thing. Put it in a matrix. Smaller things go faster. And this way, in this case, it's detected by having a complementary nucleic acid. So that's how the detection isn't by antibody, by complementary. But I want you to focus on E and F. Do you see anything interesting about E and F? Okay, let me focus your attention on RNU6 in E and F. Do you see anything interesting? I'll go ahead and tell you. These three are copied, and these three right over here. They're exactly the same. So I write to the journal. In this case, it's the Journal of Experimental Medicine, which is supposed to be from a place where they actively detect problems with images. So I write to them and say, there's a problem here. Amazingly, in a month, this is a record, they publish a correction to this article. I mean, some of these articles that I write to them can take 8 years before they do a correction. And one of the things, Nick is detecting things at scale, large numbers. And there were a large number of people, including, I think I saw some names who are listening to this online, who detect large numbers of papers. I don't do. I have very small numbers of papers. But I persist. I never give up. I will, if I haven't got proper action on it, I will write to them, every 6 months, every year, what's happening, why aren't you doing it? It frequently produces results. But in this case, I didn't have to do that. 1 month. Okay, so this is the result. So now these don't look like these. They've substituted the data. However, I have to make an admission here. It's terrible. Somewhere in my brain, these images are stored. And there's a part of my brain that seems to be devoted to the storage of these images. And there was a paper by the same first author, same last author, and some of the middle authors are shared, that was from 3 years before, that I had found some problems in and got some corrections in. And I remembered an image from that paper, and that's this particular paper. And there were a number of problems with this, and just in the interest of time, I'm going to skip them. But I remembered this particular figure here. Okay, totally different paper. This is a different experiment, very different. And so there were a couple things. Number one is, this is what E originally looked like. This is what it looks like now. Do you see anything? All it is flipped 180 degrees. Okay, it's the same data flipped 180 degrees. So I wrote to the editor of the journal and said, congratulations, fastest response time ever, 1 month. I still have some questions. So my question number one is, how do you know it's been flipped? How do you know it's right now and it wasn't right before? I mean, what's changed? Why is it, well, what evidence did the authors give you that it's correct now? I mean, what's the nature of this mistake? Response, we know it's correct, case closed. So I said, well, wait a second here. I have another problem. And that is, if you take these data and then take these other ones that I just showed you from that other paper 3 years before and flip them, you will see that they are the same. And I refer to these things as submarines, and they have periscopes, and that's how you see. You can see the periscope here is a little right of center. Here's the periscope here. Here's the scleropode. It's a little left of center. Here's the periscope. Clearly, they're same data. This is incredible, okay? These authors know that there is some terrible person out there scrutinizing their papers, okay? And because my confidentiality was violated by one of those editors that I've been contacting, they know who I am. And by the way, I always use my own name. When I contact the editors, I'm open about it. I use my own name, no problem. But I don't, but they're not supposed to share my name. The editors are not supposed to share my name with the authors. But I happen to know that they did. So they know who I am. So they know that there's this terrible person looking into their articles, and they have, I'm going to use another technical term here, it's called chutzpah, and that they have the nerve to substitute in a paper of correction data from some other previous paper. That's crazy, right? So I contact them. The journal says we'll look into it, and so on. Here's another from the same group. Do you see anything? This is what's called a heat map. Things go up, they're green, things go down, they're red, whatever. Do you see anything here? That's right. So if you say, you see this block here? That's over here, this block here. These data have been copied, and this is true as well, have been copied over here. That cannot happen, okay? And if you notice the labeling over here, it's completely distinct here. There's no way in these two experiments with two different silencing RNAs that you could get the exact same data. It's not possible. This is figure 1 of the paper. The entire paper is based upon this, which comes from this. The entire paper is based upon these data. All right? There are 13 authors on this paper. There are supposed to be peer reviewers on this paper. Not a single one of them. I mean, it took me 2 seconds to look at this, say, oh my goodness, they've copied these data. And that's not legitimate. All right. I'm going to just right. As I said, I contacted the New York Times, and they started calling up the journals and contacting the authors. Found out that the author is a fairly prominent individual. Front page New York Times article in 2017. Not only front page, but also the entire inner fold of the newspaper, and it had a great photo of me looking like a spy in Central Park. It was great. The author sues me and sues the New York Times, and for good measure, he sues his own institution. All of them are dismissed at what's called summary judgment. It was a fascinating experience. One of the greatest things was discovery, where you get to, they ask you for your documents, you ask them for their documents, and that's how I learned that not only were the editors sharing my name, they were actually conspiring with those authors against me. It took 5 years before it was dismissed, but it was eventually dismissed at summary judgment. And fascinating story, the person who sued me didn't pay his first set of lawyers. Then the second set of lawyers say, oh, I'm going to put a lien on his house. He didn't pay them either, and each one of them has got more than $1 million judgment against him. All these the first paper that I referred to, there's only an editorial expression of concern. The second one, also just an editorial of concern. The one from which it was taken is retracted, and this one was retracted as well. And there are quite a few retractions and corrections from this particular group. But this is not a good system, that you can't get the attention of journals until you bring the media in. That's not how this should work. The journals should be fixing these things just because the plain facts are evident that there are problems here. I'm just going to illustrate a couple more things. This is about nanoparticles. The point is, any data can be faked. So these data from this one paper are the same data as these from a different paper. There's all sorts of stuff that is absolutely the same. They're supposed to represent different experiments. Okay? Institutions. So here's another one, which is also immunoblots. And this one I've made simple for you. You can clearly see that this, and this are the same. And you can see the little dot here. Remember I told you it's the dirt, which is diagnostic. Okay, 20, 45, 50. So, important paper. And this, what I'm looking at is really distinguishes, these are in prominent journals, not what paper mills tend to focus on. These are fairly prominent journals. And so there's this duplication. So this institution where one of the authors is placed was worried about this. So they decided to hire a image specialist, a computer scientist who's an image specialist to analyze this. Doesn't look like, to me, requires much analysis, but all right. So, here's the analysis. And if this is 50 and 45, if you look at this, pixel by pixel, they're identical. Pixel by pixel, they're identical. However, if you look at this one, number 25, it doesn't look like it at all. It doesn't look similar at all, even though that's because it was 20, not 25. So the person who's doing this analysis, this expert, was analyzing the wrong band. Neither he, nor the institution, nor the journal noticed this as a problem. Okay, so, but let's go back. Pixel by pixel, these are identical. Couldn't get them any closer. Well, our hero, his job is not to find out whether it's the same image. His job is to prove that it's not. So he decides to go in and do another analysis. And that's this here. And I don't know, there were these arrows pointing to something, some differences. You can see here the sun rising over Crete. And again, I couldn't create images that are more similar than these if I tried. But there are some trivial differences that, again, arise as you copy and paste. And so, again, the standard is not, should not be, can I find some trivial difference? It should be, how likely is it that these two images, which are so similar, could have originated without a common origin, in one set of lanes, in one, I mean, there's zero chance of that. But in any case, this person was completely exonerated. This is just one example of many, many examples for this particular author, completely exonerated by her institution and the journals on the basis of this sort of analysis. Final, this is fluorescent microscopy. And this is an interesting, so it turns out that these are two different cell lines, okay? There's no way that the data for two different experiments, right? Two different cell lines, that the data for one could be the same as in the other, but you can see clearly that these data, they're different colors, but they're exactly the same, so on and so forth. And you can see these bitten into ice cream cones that represent the data. They are the same. Now, interestingly, what this image is supposed to show is that there's no overlap between this and these. And it turns out, if you can see here, there is no overlap. But that's because these data are some different cells, and these data are from these cells. I mean, they couldn't overlap. They're not the same cells. They're not even, in the same place in 2 dimensions. So, of course, they couldn't overlap, but that's the conclusion. Write to the journal. There's some other problems with this paper as well. Write to the journal and say, hey, okay, I don't know whether this is an error or not. I don't know, I always start off with that. But there's clearly a problem here. Journal writes back to me and says, we've talked to the authors. They explained how they did the experiment. There's no problem here. How can you tell me that there's no problem? The data here are the same for 2 different cell lines, and you're comparing different cells. That's end of story. It's not a problem. These are just more examples of that's Sri Lanka with Little Island off of it. It's the same data. Okay. Here's one of my favorite examples, and this is related. This is a less prominent journal. Now, I mentioned gravestones at the beginning about the college professor. On my gravestone, I wanted to read, discoverer of ovarian cancer in males. Now, you are probably thinking one of 2 things to yourself. Number 1 is, men don't have ovaries, so how can they have ovarian cancer? Now, you might say at a second level, oh, maybe he's referring to transgender males. I'm not talking about transgender males, okay? I am talking, these data which you can see on the left-hand side here. Here are the patients with ovarian cancer, 19 males, 29 females. Okay? Now, I've got another paper like this, but I have to be fair, right? I have to be fair. I also have a paper with prostate cancer in females. Okay? So, this obviously couldn't be correct. This is table 1. The whole paper is based upon these patients, the data from these patients. And it's in a field, microRNAs in cancer, which has completely been parasitized by paper mill products. So it takes me a couple seconds, I use the techniques, and I find this other paper published in the same journal earlier on thyroid cancer. And the data are all exactly the same. The table of data are exactly the same. By the way, this is also a paper mill product. Contact the journal. And I say, hey, ovarian cancer in males, same table, and I give them other reasons that both of these papers are likely to be paper mill products. They put a thing, this article is under investigation. 2 years later, it still says this article is under investigation. It should take them 30 seconds to get rid of an article, to retract an article that has ovarian cancer in males, all right? 2 years later. I can't tell you the whole story, but I was able to get them to eventually retract both of these papers. All right. Now, tell me about time. How long have I been talking?
15 minutes more.
50 minutes more. Excellent, excellent. So, when I started working on these matters more than a decade ago, there were only a small number of us who were working actively in this. I was at a meeting with Morten recently. There were 40 people working on this now. It's fantastic. There has been there's been a tremendous expansion of the number of people working on these issues, and there's also been a lot more attention. You can barely read an issue of Science or Nature without some sort of article about these issues nowadays. So that's been very gratifying. One of the things I think that distinguishes my work is I focus not only on the problems, I know Morten's interested in this as well, but what are the solutions to these problems? And I write extensively in something called Times Higher Education. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but I have articles in that quite often about these sorts of issues. And I'm interested in solutions, not just the problems. So we're going to start with peer review. My graduate advisor was a man named Dan Koshland. He was the editor of Science for 10 years. And when I was a graduate student, when he was the editor of Science. And he said something which I think is very important. He paraphrased Winston Churchill. I don't know how many are familiar with this statement from Winston Churchill where he says, democracy is absolutely the worst form of government except for all the other ones that have been tried heretofore. I'm paraphrasing. He would say, peer review is absolutely the worst way to determine whether an article should be published except all the other ones that have been tried heretofore. All sorts of problems with peer review. I am not an opponent. Some people I know think that peer review is just such a failure, we should just get rid of it altogether. It's not something that I don't favor that. But there are tremendous problems in peer review. So what are the sorts of problems? One of them is bias. Okay? And I'm just going to use an example. My name's David Sanders, and in the neighboring lab, when I was at MIT at the Whitehead Institute, was David Baltimore. I don't know if any of you know David Baltimore, but he's a Nobel Prize winner for discovering reverse transcriptase. And I'm just using his name because he was in the neighboring lab and his name begins with David. Okay? Very simple. So if you get an article that has David Baltimore as an author, you're going to want to review it. You get it from an editor, you want to review it. It doesn't matter whether it's about rutabaga leaves you're going to want to know what David Baltimore is doing in his lab. David Sanders, on the other hand, I don't really have time, maybe not. What happens is the editor sends out the article, and it will have a title, and it will have the authors and the institutions they're associated with, and an abstract. And people decide whether they're going to review it on that basis. If the editor has a hard time finding reviewers, he or she is going to think this isn't that interesting. They're less likely to want to publish it. So there's an inherent bias because of whose name is there, or the institutions that they're associated with that's already put in. Not only that, I hear this all the time from people. If they see, I'll just use the same name, David Baltimore's, they're going to cut him some slack. They're going to say, I don't have to scrutinize the data in this paper as closely as I do for David Sanders. Okay, I'm really going to make sure that he's doing right. This other guy has a track record, so on and so forth. So many things wrong with this. Okay, so many things wrong with this. And I'll give you the first example. In American symphony orchestras, they used to be all male. They were getting a lot of women to audition. But the way symphony orchestras pick who's going to join them is all of the violins get together, and they audition the new person who wants to join the violin section. All the flautists get together, and they're going to, audition the person who plays the flute. Well, they were still all male. Then they introduced a curtain between the people listening and the performer, and they also put in carpeting so you couldn't hear the high heels, people coming in. All of a sudden, women started joining American symphony orchestras. Now, 40, 50, 60% of the players in orchestras are women. Now, I don't care whether the bias was intentional or unintentional, conscious or unconscious. It doesn't matter to me. I don't want to get into that argument. There was clearly bias, which was eliminated by putting in the curtain. So one thing that we need to do to improve peer review is we should not have the names of the authors and the institutions associated with them when it's sent out for peer review at all. They should be written in the third person, and because we should get rid of those biases. The second thing is when we're told, I'm going to give this person a pass because of this. I'm going to, my thinking is changed by the fact of who I know the authors are. Who does that reviewer think actually generated the figures and did the experiments? It wasn't David Baltimore. It is some graduate or a postdoc, right? They're the ones who are actually doing it. In these cases, I never said who was, and this is one of the things why I successfully survived the suit. I never said it was this person who did it. All I said was, there's a problem in the paper. It's got the names of these authors. Someone's responsible for it. They all have a common author. So there's responsibility there, but I didn't say that person created the data or created the figures or did the writing, right? I just said, there's a problem here. So there shouldn't be these biases. I also argued the same thing for grant proposals, so on. So I believe in two-part reviews. And that is, the first part is you review it without knowing the names of the authors or institutions. And then the second step, you get that because it could be relevant. It could tell you, now I know why they keep on citing this paper that nobody else believes in. Or now I know, this is not somebody who should be relied upon, right? They've done these bad things in the past. But science first, then people. And the same thing should apply to grant. Another thing about peer review, too many papers. Peer reviewers are completely overtaxed. And what is the motivation for doing a good job at peer review? What's the reward for doing a good job at peer review? The answer is 0. You feel good about it. You've contributed to the scientific, but in terms of your career, so on and so forth, zilch. What's the punishment for doing a bad job at peer review? The worst thing that happens to you is that particular editor doesn't ask you to do any more reviews, which for most people is not a punishment. We get asked to do too many reviews as it is. Okay? And because peer reviews are not published, or they're not published with people's names and so on, there is no accountability in the system. So, what do I recommend? I've been talking about this for quite some time. Peer review. So we do things exactly backwards. We know the names of the authors when we do the review, and the reviewers are anonymous. We should do it the other way. We should not know the names of the authors and institutions, and the reviews should be published in the online version along with the name of the reviewer. I believe in being open and transparent about science. And this is a controversial thing, but we can talk about that. I'm happy to talk about that in the questions in a little while. And in the United States, again, I know the United States best, my CV, that discusses what I've accomplished, it'll first have my research articles. Those are the most important things. Then it will have my review articles. Then it will have my, posters and presentations. I'm going to put this one on it. So, and when I'm reporting on my annual activities to the head of my department, one of the things I'm supposed to list is who did I review for? Which journals did I review for? Okay? There's no question about the quality about my review, just which ones I did. Two things about that. Number one is the head of my department has no way of knowing whether I'm lying and making that up, right? I mean, if they really wanted to check, certain journals list their reviewers at the end of the year, but my head of my department isn't going to spend more than a nanosecond looking at that list. It's irrelevant to anything. And the second is, there's no question about the quality. I believe that part 4 should be the peer reviews, links to the peer reviews, because those are authentic contributions to the scientific endeavor. The scientific endeavor does depend, in its current form, on peer review and on quality peer review. And so, if you reviewed that article on ovarian cancer and said it should be published, the world should know about who you are. All right. So we need that sort of accountability. Post-publication review. There is nothing privileged about pre-publication peer review. The reviewers aren't smarter, better, more committed. Clearly, from the examples I've showed you, they're not doing a good job often. And people like Morten and myself and many other people find problems. That is just as valid as the people who found problems with the article beforehand. There's no reason to value one versus the other. And if this problem had existed pre-publication and you would not have published the article because of that, you should retract the article. Very simple. Right? And so we need a more robust system of incorporating post-publication review in the journal process. I have argued for a long time, 1994 to be precise, that journal articles should have a part for comment on them directly. Now, there's been reference to PubPeer. Many of you may be familiar with PubPeer, where people can go in anonymously under their names, post criticisms of articles and so on. But you have to know to go there, right? And most people don't know about it, and you have to. But I'm already reading an article. I would like to get the reviews. It gives me a little perspective on the article. But if somebody has a comment on that article, good or bad, right? It could be, this has led to some really important things, or Figure 2 has a duplication in it. That should be attached to the article. Now, it should be curated. PubPeer itself is curated. You can't just say terrible things on PubPeer. I know some people who are the targets of what it said, think that that's allowed. No, it's not allowed. It's curated. So journals need to have a curated forum for post-publication review. It's essential and important. And it should be valued and it should be rewarded. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. Right. Anonymity. I do not believe in anonymity. Okay? Now, I differ with some of my fellow sleuths. I will tell you that more and more of my fellow sleuths who used to be anonymous are no longer anonymous. And I believe in open science. Now, if there's anybody who should be afraid of not being anonymous, it should be me. I've actually been sued 5 years. Being sued is a very expensive process, very time-consuming process. But we have to do that. And the more of us there are, the less likely that any of us are going to be targeted for a lawsuit, right? I was targeted because there weren't very many of us doing this sort of thing, and a number of the other ones were anonymous. I was out there. Could tell you more stories about that. But in any case, it doesn't matter. You have to do, science has to be open. And the other thing that's connected to this is sometimes I get the criticism, being open, you're undermining science, right? There's such, again, speaking from the United States perspective, there's such distrust of science. The last election was excellent evidence of that. And there's such just aren't you undermining science by pointing out the problems? And and the answer is, it's the people who are doing these bad things that are undermining science, not me who are detecting it. I am actually a very strong advocate of science. I teach a class on COVID. I work on how viruses get into cells. I was spending a lot of time during the first year of COVID trying to counter all the misconceptions, all the anti-vax propaganda, all the COVID is a hoax propaganda that was out there. I spent a lot of time dealing in social media trying to... So I actually believe that science is the best. It's not flawless, and that's what makes it science, as opposed to theology. It's not flawless, but it's the best thing that we have to guide public policy and public decision-making. So I fully embrace science. But we, even if the rest of society, again I'm speaking from the American perspective, has decided that truth doesn't matter anymore, truth is irrelevant, we scientists have to adhere to the truth. And I believe that we have to speak it forthrightly, and we can't worry about the costs of speaking the truth. We have to continue to speak that. Conflicts of interest. And this is really important to one. Journals are not interested in dealing with these issues of problems with publications, right? For many of the journals, it's a money-making endeavor, and so they don't want to make authors afraid. Sometimes some of these authors are prominent authors for these particular journals, and they tend to get lots of citations. They don't want to alienate them or their friends. Many of these journals are mostly in it for the money. Many of the ones that are parasitized by the paper mills. Just about, they don't really care about the quality of peer review. They're simply interested in the money. So they don't want to engage in dealing with these issues of research integrity. So, are we running out of time? Should I be wrapping up? Okay. So, no one in the history of scientific publication has ever said, I want to be an editor in order to clean up the literature. Right? People want to be the editor because it brings prestige. They get to see articles in the literature before anybody else does. It allows them to do favors for people, have favors done for them, they're interested in the larger scientific endeavor, but no one has ever said, oh boy, I want to be an editor so I can deal with all the past bad stuff that's in the literature. So they're trying to protect their reputation, and all the time I hear back from journals, why does it takes you 6 weeks to accept a paper? Why does it take you 8 years to decide that the paper isn't any good? Oh, we don't have the staff, we don't have the manpower for that. And my answer to them always is, stop publishing papers, stop contaminating the literature further, deal with the problems in the past, and then you can go forward. You obviously have the manpower to publish bad stuff. Why can't you have the manpower to deal with past? That argument is not very successful, but I will tell you that journals are taking this much more seriously than they have in the past. And just in the last few years, I've been invited to speak with journals about these issues and what they need to do to confront them. So they are finally paying attention. Research institutions have Center for Genomic Regulation, whatever it was called. They have no incentive to deal with this either, because these researchers are bringing money into the institution. If they find them guilty of misconduct, they might have to give the money back, or this person who's been bringing money won't be able to bring money in the future. So they will do absolutely everything. This is my experience. Absolutely everything not to investigate, and if to investigate, to try not to find people guilty. Here's one of my favorite ploys. Article. Clear example of image duplication, manipulation, so on and so forth. But person A says that person B did it. Person B says that person A did it. We can't decide, so there's no misconduct. Because they can't say the misconduct occurred because of this person. You understand that? They say no misconduct happened. And that's their conclusion from their investigation. All right. So there are all sorts of these conflicts of interest. New approach. Here's suggestion number 1. Besides the suggestions I've been making as we go along. Too many papers, too many journals. I would argue easily, 75% of the literature does not need to be published. It contributes nothing beyond the data in the paper. Okay, I don't need all this introduction and the discussion. There's nothing there that isn't just immediately present in the data for 75% of papers. The Nobel Prize in chemistry in this past year was given to about artificial proteins and protein structure prediction. The artificial protein part actually went to somebody I went to graduate school with, David Baker. But the other half was for something called AlphaFold. It's an AI-based protein structure prediction program. It's fantastic. It works great. I've written about it. I wrote about it back in 2023 in Times Higher Education. But where did that program come from? Did it come from looking at the scientific literature? It did not. It came from 2 databases. There are databases of sequences, and there are databases of protein structures. Now, it used to be, back in the old days, I determined the new sequence of a gene. I would publish a paper about that sequence of the gene, and I'd have a figure with that information in it. Useless. That sequence is useless. I mean, I'm going to have to type it in myself from the article. Okay, that figure is useless. I have a structure paper. I want to illustrate the structure looking like this, okay, and maybe like that. It's useless. It's just an image. What am I going to do with that? Aha. I have databases. And so now with the sequences, I can go in and compare and look at different organisms and, different sequences and see how things have evolved and, how many copies are there in the I can do this all because it's present in the database. Same thing with protein structures. I can compare this with this. I can see how do these different proteins interact with this particular drug. And you get them all, I can get all sorts of information that's not available just by looking at the articles. And I can generate new information that isn't present there. That's what the AlphaFold did. No papers, just took the information in these databases and figured out how to predict protein structures. We still have occasionally some sequence data published. And occasionally we will have, a protein structure. But in my field, people will just deposit the coordinates for the structure in the database. That's their contribution, and they can list that as a contribution because there's unique IDs for each one of those things. Sometimes, sometimes it's an important structure, so you still publish the structure because it says something interesting. But this can be true for many, many other fields in biology, which is my own field. We don't need papers. What we need are data. I showed you an image before about mRNAs or microRNAs. They go up, they go down, so on and so forth, in this ridiculous heat map presentation that I just want to assure you, no one in the history of mankind has ever actually looked at those images. You either publish in paper, nobody ever bothers looking at them. They're not useful data, those images. But what would be useful if the numerical data were published in a database, and I could type in, I want to know under what conditions does microRNA blah, blah, blah go up? Or when does it go down? Or if I treat with the following drug, which mRNAs go up and which go down? And I could compare across a whole bunch of different cell types, different experiments. I can't do, I'd have to go in and look at each individual article and so on and so forth. Useless. Okay? So I believe that governments should be investing in funding databases, curated databases, databases that have checks on the quality of the data, and that occurs on those other databases. That's the future of science. Nowadays you have to publish a paper on this goes up, this goes down, and the paper contributes nothing beyond the data. So we really need to focus on those sorts of things. I have lots more suggestions, but the most interesting part of this talk will be our discussion afterwards. So I want to thank you all for your... Oh, I do have one more slide. Very funny. I forgot about this one. This is also by François Lemoine, and it is called Time-Saving Truth from Falsehood and Envy. Time has the sickle that's truth up there. We've got falsehood and envy down here. And, remember I said, sometimes it takes me 8 years to get these things. I've been working on this for more than a decade. And you might think we're not getting anywhere, we're not making any progress, but we do with time. We are achieving changes to the ecosystem. And so this is an important message. I have one final message, though. This is François Lemoine's last painting. Very shortly after this painting, he committed suicide. We don't know why exactly he committed suicide. There's no reason for us to commit suicide. I'm just telling you, it can be extremely frustrating when we have truth on our side and we don't get the products, and it takes forever. So this is a cautionary tale about the fact that time, it takes time to get these things corrected, but sometimes we get so frustrated because it doesn't seem that we're making any progress. That's all. I want to thank you all for your attention, and I'm happy to address any questions.
Thank you very much, David. Great talk.
Thank you.
Also thanks to Nick.
Yes.
Talk.
Yes.
And now there's open for discussion. Just keep your microphone.
Okay.
And I'll take another one, I think. So, is Nick online now still? Or?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. So maybe we should take questions from the audience first. Uinv.
Yes, thank you. It was very inspiring lectures from both of you actually, and I appreciate it very much. There are journals that have open peer review. You didn't mention anything about that, in particular in physics, astrophysics, geophysics. There are quite many of these. And besides, I also have a normal peer review going on in parallel, but they published it reprints and everybody is able to bring in. So I think that is something that we have to work on to improve the quality of the peer review so we can avoid these problems that you have been addressing. I don't know if the others will comment on that.
Thank you, Anna. It's best if you can use the microphone and soon get one, because the people who are listening to the streaming can follow it.
But I can repeat.
Yeah, we can repeat,
So the question is, so in physics, there is open peer review, and there are preprints. And we also have preprint archives in biology as well. So a few things to be said about this. When there are other fields in which, for example, many of the social science fields where you don't get the names of authors and the institutions that they're associated with when you're reviewing. So that does exist. I knew the first editor-in-chief of eLife, Randy Sheckman, and they also have a semi-open peer review process in that journal. Preprints are a very interesting phenomenon, and the original purpose of preprints was that you were supposed to get the comments of your peers before you submitted an article for publication, and that would help you improve the article at the time that it was being submitted. Unfortunately, in the biological sciences, it's mostly been used as a form of priority establishment. You put it in the preprint in order to say, I got to this first, and you submit it. You put it in the preprint at the same time as you put it into submit it to the journal. So it isn't fulfilling that same sort of process. So there is some comment on preprints, but if you people have studied this, I haven't studied this formally, but people have studied this, the amount of actual commentary on preprints is extremely low. Typical articles don't have much discussion on the preprint servers. It probably works better in physics, and physics was a model that biology tried to pick up on. And it's perfectly valid. But there were some preprints also will have the problem if the authors are the authors and the institutions that they're associated with are on the preprint, as they tend to be. That can also bias the process as well. So that it continues to have that same issue. But I think, open peer review is something that's coming, but it isn't widespread yet.
Any other questions? And I will get the microphone so you can. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to thank both of the speakers, or all three speakers, very much. This was very interesting. I'm from a very different field. I'm from philosophy. I would also like to add to what David was saying. It seems to me that a number of further reasons for thinking that far too much is published. The level, the just sort of multitude, the magnitude of publication is quite detrimental for the development of science in various ways. So for the good of science, not just what you were saying, I think there are And I could go on for some time. And I think there are many good reasons for saying that the output in publication should be much less. So this system of having incentives in publishing as much as possible is, as such, quite detrimental for the good purpose of science. And I think that's very important.
Well, thank you. I fully agree. I mean, there are all sorts of metrics. So administrators are always interested in metrics, right? And so most of those metrics are, I would argue, pseudo-metrics. So how often are you cited, right? Well, if you work in microRNAs and cancer, your papers are going to be cited a zillion times because there are all these fake papers, and they need to be citing something, so they cite other papers in that field. So your H index is going to be artificially inflated because of that. We also have for journals, we have citation indices, right? A completely ridiculous number as well. First, many journals report false numbers for those. But secondarily, that tells you nothing about the quality of an article published in that journal, right? It turns out that statistically, those citation indices are overweighted by things that are cited zillions of times, and things that are cited, less often don't impact that citation index as often. So, but people will measure the quality of your individual article on the basis of the journal in which it's published and its citation index. It's insane. It really doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So we really have to change the way we think about the publication process. And we need to have another one of my recommendations, again, for the sciences, is that funding agencies should have lists of permitted places. It has to be a dynamic list, but permitted places where you are allowed to publish your research. There are all sorts of predatory publishers. They are a lot of the places where these paper mill products are published. But if a journal is not having quality peer review, you shouldn't be allowed to use federal funds, United States governmental funds, to publish in those particular journals. And, that'll immediately make those journals less, desirable to publish in, independent of their citation index. Please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that there are huge differences between disciplines in the citation index. And it's interesting to look into why that is so and so on. So if you look at the very best journals in mathematics, they're actually cited pretty rarely compared to, say, biological science and medicine. And there's no reason to think that there's any difference in quality at all. So agencies, funding agencies, actually rely on these things, and also university to an extent which is completely irrational to some people, I would say.
I agree.
Thank you. I would like to, are there any more questions? If not, I would like to ask what can be done about this. You just said some things that were done, but are there any initiatives from the ERC or from the National Academy, etc.? Because it's such a huge problem. It should be,
So there have been a number of studies and there have been a number of pronouncements about, how to deal with them. And some people have focused on, for example, open access to journals, because there are multiple imperatives here. One of them is about the quality of the scientific literature, but there is an imperative that is worth considering, making it both more accessible, both to publish and to read articles if you are not from a wealthy country. So that's an important imperative and embrace it. But so people want to focus on open access, right? To deal with some of those issues. The problem is that a good part of the open access journals are in it to make money rather than actually contribute to the scientific literature. I'm going to tell you right now, Nick, I think Nick is going to shake his head vigorously Special issues should be abolished. Okay? They simply are not necessary. They contribute next to nothing. If you can't get your article published in a journal on the basis of its actual content, we don't need it. Now, I know in social sciences we have things called Festschrifts, right? Where frequently you're honoring a retiring professor or something like that, and so you're all going to be contributing to that. I think that's a different situation, different imperative. In science, we simply don't need those sorts of endeavors, and they've been completely overtaken and corrupted the last few years. And I'd like to hear from Nick, if possible.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm not sure. Yes, no, I completely agree. Yes, completely agree that we should pretty much get rid of special issues. I think they have been a way for publishers to expand rapidly in terms of the by getting more manpower, right, more editors, but in a way where I guess editors come to you. So many of, particularly MDPI, the Hindawi journals, but other publishers as well, have a button. Almost the first button is, rather than submit a paper, it's submit a proposal for a special issue. Was sort of the most prominent thing on the Hindawi journals websites. And in that way, you're massively sort of multiplying. If you can get another 100 people to guest edit special issues, and each of those has 100 papers in, and you're receiving, $2,000, $3,000 from an article processing charge for each paper, you're going to make an awful lot of money. And so it enabled this rapid expansion of various publishers. But you are, even if you are doing this sort of with the best of intentions, you are weakening your oversight. You have some set of editors who hopefully you trust on your editorial board, and you're opening this up to some editors who you don't know so well. You haven't worked with them. I don't know, I'm not at a publisher, I don't know sort of what level of vetting or any sort of thing goes into this, even that people doing it properly. It was clear at Hindawi that nothing, there was no vetting whatsoever. You didn't have to be a real person to guest edit a special issue, let alone sort of a trustworthy person. So yes, I think they are often a way. Even the best ones or the ones done with the best of intentions are, this is a guest issue, often in memoriam for some, long-standing editor or long-standing academic in the field, and that's everyone giving themselves a pat on the back, I think, mostly. But okay, it's not fraud, it's just, maybe it's true, whatever it is, but it's not fraud. But I think that's about as good as it gets to ones where, yes, it's completely opening the door to fraudsters.
But do we need a special agency like those against doping, as you mentioned, Nick, against combat these things, because it's so tremendously wasteful and harmful for science? So, and why aren't funding agencies like the research councils and the EU and so on more interested in this? Because they are wasting a lot of money on this.
I wish I could answer that question, why. It's certainly something that I have tried to bring to their attention, others as well. In the United States, our Office of Research Integrity is understaffed and underfunded and takes forever to even look at the cases that they already have. Some sort of larger movement towards infrastructure change, I think, is just not something that they tend to think about. It's beyond their thinking capacity. I will just mention, just to follow up on what Nick says, every single day I get 2, 3, or more invitations to be an editor for a special issue in fields I know nothing about. Every day. Now, fortunately, my spam detector sends them all to, not all of them, most of them to junk. But occasionally I look at the junk. Sometimes actually important stuff winds up in the filter, and so I check it occasionally. But 2 or 3 every single day on random topics that I know nothing about. And so if they're sending them to me, they're obviously sending them to people who, I guess, have free time to do this sort of thing, and to get involved in these processes. But it's corrupt, and it's really not contributing to the scientific endeavor.
Could it be that people are high up in the systems that could do something about it themselves don't want it because they have been guilty of some of these things?
In this particular case, I would say probably not. But I do have colleagues who I have found have published in predatory journals. And I have never, tried to get them in trouble over it, but I have contacted them and say, do you understand, I've had colleagues who published in this journal with the ovarian cancer in males. And so I wrote to them and said, this is really a predatory journal. Why would you want to publish it? And then they tend to be defensive, but also they don't tend to publish in it anymore. So they are responsive, but they don't want to go back and look at past history. But the problem is that people who are evaluating you, they don't know which journals are good and which journals are not. That's why we need a central vetting organization. And Morten said something at a recent meeting that suggested to me that maybe in Norway you are moving in that direction. Is that correct, or? Yeah.
That can be. I'm not sure that, because there's a lack of resources there too. So it's a very slow process in getting the journals off the list. So I will not say it's very successful, but it helps a bit. Yeah. Because we have thousands of journals, and now,
yes,
after a couple of years, maybe 100 journals are off the list. That's the numbers.
I see.
Yeah. So
it's better than nothing, but again, if you have a large agency such as the NIH or the RC or something that, taking some sort of leadership role, I think that would make it easier and important to do. But they haven't done that so far.
Well, we are 10 minutes over time almost now. But thank you very much, David and Nick, both of you, for giving these great talks and the discussion. And this is something we would like to follow up in our forum, because there are much more here to look closely at. So thanks a lot again.